They'll just take the jig down, blindly put it on there, no tape, like, yeah, this is good, that's good, and then this one's like 5 mils in front of this one, and they never even checked it till they're done, and you're like, whoa, you'd be dead nuts, exactly the same. But that's like the biggest thing for us, is we measure the jig when it moves from one ski to the next. That's one of the biggest things I see that happens, is people don't measure the jig when it moves from one ski to the next. Alright, first things first, we don't always trust the exact measurement on this location, same, so we'll put a piece of tape across as a reference point to begin. So this will go right on the mount line. This is for the recommended line. Now I use these as a reference so I can measure and double check that this one, 75 and 8. And 75 and 8.5, 9, so they're within a 0.5 millimeter. It's good, so now I know they're the same. Next thing I'm going to do is double check what binding I have. Grab the jig that correlates with that. So now that she's on there, we'll double check that the boot's in the correct position. Okay, that's really good. So the next step I'm going to do is I'm just going to double check that the jig itself is straight and centered on the skis. And so what I'm going to do is take a punch real quick. We're just going to tap out the binding. And this is just me being overly cautious to make sure that like the tape marks are the same, the jig's centered. This is actually proper before I start doing my operation. So I'm gonna actually pull it off, set to the side, take a caliper. I'll measure where those marks are and just make sure that the jig's centered. If not, then I'll adjust the jig as needed. And you can see here, it's like dead on. It's right on the edge, perfect, right on the dot. Right on the edge, perfect, right on the dot. Move down, I'll check the heel. Make sure it's straight all the way through. That tells me that there might be a little, so I might need to move over just a hair on the rear end there. If your jig gets out of 2 millimeters of range, then you have to replace your jig. Right now it's about 1/2 to 1 millimeter. So it's really important that you measure and double check your jig all the time too, to make sure that it is straight. So now I'm going to just move my little point. I'll check my measurement one more time. That's pretty close. We're within like 1 millimeter at the most. Okay. So that's just a quick reference check, just to make sure that the tooling is ready before I start the actual drilling process. Now we're going to go back to the original spot. I can see the pins through the hole. If I'm not sure, I'll double check the boot. Make sure we're in the right spot. Okay. Then the next step you have to do is double check what drill bit you need to have. So depending on the construction of the skis, if it has a metal top sheet or metal laminate inside, it's going to require a different diameter of a drill bit. If it doesn't have metal, then there's 2 different options, either a 3.5 or a 3.6 diameter. So most of the time, 90% of the time, the skis will tell you right on the ski itself what drill bit to use. So like for instance on this Vocal ski here, it'll tell you to drill with a 3.6 by 9.5 drill bit. So it tells you right on here on this actual ski what drill bit to use for the ski. They don't always tell you what they are, so that way you have to kind of know by knowing what the construction of the ski consists of. If you're unsure, you start with a narrower bit, like a 3.5. You can always check your depth from the bottom to make sure that your bit's not too deep. If it was something like this, then you can see that the bit's going to come out the top of the ski. Over here, there's ample amount of material. You're not going to have any issues with the depth of the bit going into the ski. Okay, make sure it's tight, locked and loaded. If I'm not sure what the ski consists of, I can drill a hole, check it. If there's any metal in there, then I know I need to switch to the bigger diameter. If not, I'll continue with the standard diameter, 3.6. So the next step here is one of the steps that kind of sets us apart from other places that do mounting, and that is even though I have this tape line set up on both of them, I know they're in the same spot. When I move this jig over to this ski, I want them to be in the exact position. So even though I've measured 5 times, I'm actually going to re-measure where this jig actually sits on the ski. So that way when I move it over to the second ski, I can put it in the exact position that this one is. So 45 and 5 mils. So I'm going to do the same thing, jump over, quick reference location, and I'm looking for 45.5. So I'm at 45.4. So we're going to shimmy this a millimeter, which is totally doable. So then one more check, 45.5, right on the money. Slowly drill this in vertical, so you're not leaning and pressing and walking the bridge or the jig back and forth. When I drill, I like to kind of progressively start as I go down, and then at the bottom, I'll clean the bottom of the hole out to help it make sure it's cut really well all the way through. Take off the jig. We'll tap out the holes. We'll pop on the base, will help you clean them off. I'm going to check for any debris in the holes, make sure there's no little wood shavings or filings down in there, and then that way I won't have any dimpling happen when the screw bottoms out and hits the debris. Off comes the tape. Then the next process is gluing. So applying the glue is really important that you don't hydrolock the hole. And so what that means is I don't want to put this glue in here where the glue actually covers the entire hole like this. What that's going to do is it's actually going to trap some air underneath of the glue. And so when the screw comes down, it's going to want to force the air out of the hole. And if this is fully covered and there's not an air pocket in there, then it can actually force the glue out of the hole while the screw makes its way in there. And so it's really important that you do just enough glue or use some sort of tooling like this to make sure that you can get an air line down into the hole where the ski can breathe before you put the screw on top. And so the way that we normally will apply it here is we'll just barely let it run over the side so that it drips down in there, and then as I run the binding screws in, it'll draw that glue down and around in the hole. So each one of those has a little bit of a breathing room for the screw to go into, and then it's going to allow the glue to just follow the threads as it goes down. So then when you're applying the binding to the ski now, the screws normally come partially inserted into the binding. So I'm going to back these screws out so that way this thing can sit flush, and that way when the first screws go down, there's no binding of this thing trying to walk itself down. So we're going to reverse the screws out. I'm going to line up my holes here, double checking that I don't have that hydrolock going on. I'm going to set my clutch. And as I screw, I'm going to progressively step it down at the very end. So I'm going to go far and then let it finish. Crisscross pattern. I'll come through and I'll finish it by hand to make sure that they're properly torqued. Normally about 4 Newton meters is what the industry standard calls for binding mounting. Somewhere right around 4. So once the toe piece is on, the first thing I'm going to do is flip up the ski, double check that the binding's sitting absolutely flush to the surface on both sides of the binding, not just this side because it might be crooked sitting on the ski. So double check she's flush, good to go. Then I can move on to the next piece. So same technique, back out all your hardware. Crisscross pattern. Some bindings are notorious for not setting flush all the time, and this is one of them. So if you look under here under the heel, you can see there's a little gap showing underneath of there where the screws are still showing. So it's really important that this binding, particular to SPX, gets finished by hand and then double checked on the heel that you have it completely flush down to the surface of the top sheet. So I'll double check all 4 screws, and then I'll do a double check and make sure. There's normally a little bit of a rise on some bindings to give the ski some flexibility point underneath the heel, but I just want to make sure that where the bolts contact the ski, that this thing's flush all the way across and there's no gap underneath, and I can't see that hardware showing through anymore. Same thing, double check that that heel's flush. Good to go, good to go. Okay, they're both on there. Now the next step is to put the boot in, check the AFD if there is an adjustable AFD, and then set the forward pressure and the final din. So we'll slap the boot in here. Set the heel. This binding, when you mount it from factory to the boot that's going to be skied in it, automatically puts you like right in the middle of the forward pressure for the SPX. So that's the beauty of mounting this thing, is it's super simple, easy to mount, and pretty straightforward to work with as a technician. So super simple. No adjustable AFD on here, pretty quick. Forward pressure is already locked and loaded. Now all I have to do is just go into our iPad system, pull up the din for the customer, and then we'll do a quick test on the machine. $55, 5'6", he's 59 years old, 3+, at 285. Now let's center the boot on this machine, make sure we're right on line. Trying to align the cuff with the arm coming in, the foot. This has a foot that comes out and drops into the boot. This is what actuates the toe release side to side. And then like the other machines, when you do a heel release, the strap comes over top like this. And then these two come up and they'll pull the boot out and do a forward lean test. Drop this in, down goes the foot. And then ready to go. Depending on the test, it'll take upwards of 3 passes, left to right, to make sure you get the proper number. Choose the middle of the road. That number gets transferred over into our iPad system. We run this as a digital service system. That way we can keep track of everything over the history of your equipment, and we don't have to have any paperwork on hand. We can keep it all digitally saved on the iPad. So it's a really nice, efficient way to look back on your history and things like that, and then change, you know, the DIN setting for customers as they grow and age and go along. So it's a pretty nice intuitive system that we use. So now I'm going to run the heel strap. This is going to do full lean release. You'll see on here, almost exactly perfect, 271.3, off by 0.3 of a Newton meter. This ski will go out. We'll switch it, do the next one. I like to use my hand underneath the rear, or a screwdriver is a good lever to start that, to get it up for you. Line up the skis, lock them in. Testing a little high, so we'll take a half a DIN off of it. That easily puts us back into range, so we'll run through our testing, make sure everything's good at half a DIN low. Looks like we're consistent, and we will move on. Consistency is your friend. 275.1. Forward pressure set. I got my toe release complete on here, heel release complete. Check everything off. Double check that the boot doesn't have improper wear or anything on here, that this sole is compatible with your bindings, and if all is well, then you're good to go. All right, that's how we mount bindings at Start House. Measure 3 times, drill once. That's how we do. No dimples, no problems like that on the base. Everything's really clean and smooth. Dialed.